Hi, I am Emilio Cortés Román. I am in the 18th semester of Economics faculty. I am the intermediate level of SIL Wadi. I am 22 years old and I will introduce you my experience in the COVID pandemic. The pandemic has brought break a woe for the Mexican and family economies, leaving thousands of unemployed people and without economic support. This caused many to resort to informal and low-paid jobs or other people began to undertake in the fast food business but without recovering income before the pandemic. This pandemic affected to me directly because the job that I was doing before it was a private drive for platforms, Uber and Drive DD. And with the beginning of the quarantine, number of service fell until there was not service that happened to many drivers, both new and old who are dedicated to same business, so we can't still working like we used to before. In spite of the pandemic, my family did not do so badly because they live in Chetumal, which is a smaller city than Merida. Therefore, the number of interactions and their spread is lower. It's characterized by being a city full of government bureaucrats who did not have their fixed income suspended, which is why they had the livelihood to go through this health and economic crisis. Since I didn't have a job or school, there was no need to stay in Merida, so I decided to return to Chetumal the first month after the quarantine began. However, Merida went through a period of economic crisis, like the entire country, and the beginning because when the jobs get stopped, there were massive employment. The employment rate increases to historical levels never seen before us. Despite this, the contagious bedouin people did not stop, as many families and individuals still needed to go out to find their daily sustenance and, due to the negligence of the state's government, that everyone stayed at home in a most authority with low financial support. Such were the result because the social reality of Merida is very different. In addition to these economic problems, the increase in vulgaries to house and business was more common than before. It's a well-known fact that when the lockdown began, the Yucatan government declared a total closure of non-essential activities and most businesses in Merida are not essential. Many had to close and that first accelerated the economic crisis. Shortly afterwards, they declared cover hours between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. Then there was a dry lab in order to avoid social gatherings that spread the virus more. However, the greatest concentration of infection occurred at the bus stops and with them. Those who transported them people who had to look for another job because they were fired on it to move faster because of time restriction. The maximum of Chetumal was not as restricted as that Merida. During the first 3 months since the beginning of the lockdown, they did not have to resort to immediate total closure of non-essential activities. They were gradually closing business. Apart from the fact that majority which does not belong to the bureaucratic branch is dedicated to reality trade, so it was not necessary to close its activities. This does not mean that there were not unemployment or crises occurred, since the economic growth rate in Chetumal decreased considerably. Among the prevention measures taken, apart from the healthy distance and the lockdown, was to close public recreational spaces such as park or the Boulevard Esplanade, a considerable concentration point in Chetumal. In addition to fact that there was no restriction of air and dry life, it kept the number of infections stable and there were not major problems due to the numbers of beds available. You felt less pressure from the authorities, like in Merida, where the policies pressured you and even scared you to return home, even if you had to go to work or buy food. That was the experience of some friends and colleagues. In Chetumal, for example, the policies cars passed with megaphones where they recommended to the population to stay at home, keep at healthy distance, and be attentive to indication of federal and local authorities. They said if you stayed at home, you would not worry about get infected. Another important aspect of the rule adopted, especially in the opposition governments in the country, was the mandatory of face masks, a measure that is hugely criticized by federal government, especially by Dr. Gattel, for the lack of scientific evidence to prove that this use avoids mass contagion. However, if you move and enter any public place you have to use the face mask so you can't go outside without your protective equipment. On the one hand, all the measures adopted by local and federal authorities had an impact on the way we interacted with one society and as individuals. The appearance of fabric masks with engravings and prints was characteristic, become commercialized even by large companies such as Under Armour. The use of antibacterial gels, healthy distance, the love salted, among others, forever transformed our reality, calling itself the new normality, where the use of the internet was of vital importance for both students to continue with their teachers and workers at home through the home office. It is naive to think that we will return to normal with so many changes that have taken place and continue to happen. Digitalization was the champion of the economic and health crisis, since digitally companies were the only ones that grew in the world, due to high demand. Personally, I believe that digitalization, which had already been advancing before, took a bigger step for new ways of working, studying, and having social relations. In addition to the fact that the virus is predicted not to stop until 2022, new technological innovation will come to avoid leaving the house or having to resort to a space for gathering people if you don't have the need. In conclusion, I hope that the way we produce and are in contact with our environment will change, since the pandemic was the result of the excessive exploitation of flora and fauna, characteristic of the capitalist mode of production, not taking into account environmental implications and now health that entails cutting down the path. From my point of view, it's time of reflections at home with our families, and I am sure that we must change that selfish and individualistic way of think that we use it and that we get closer to nature but respect it at the same time. Thank you for your attention. Have a good day.